"Ma'am, with all due respect, we need an actual pilot, not someone who played a flight simulator." The words, sharp and condescending, sliced through the rising panic in the cabin. The crowd, a mix of terrified and nervously amused passengers, watched the exchange. The lead flight attendant, a man whose polished uniform was no match for the brittleness of his composure, stood with his arms crossed, blocking the aisle. He was looking down at the woman in seat 12A, who had just calmly offered to help. She was unassuming, dressed in worn jeans and a simple gray hoodie, her face betraying no emotion, no anger, no defensiveness at the public humiliation. She simply looked back at him, her gaze steady. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. A nod of understanding. A nod of acceptance. It was this unnerving calm, this profound lack of reaction, that made the flight attendant's arrogance curdle into unease. He expected a protest, an argument, some desperate claim to validity. He received only silence. But in the cockpit, the captain, hearing the exchange over the open cabin intercom, felt a flicker of something else. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was curiosity. He had seen that kind of stillness before, in places where panic was a death sentence and ego was a liability. It was the calm of the professional, a quiet so deep it was louder than any alarm. If you believe that true competence needs no introduction, type "competence" in the comments below. The situation was deteriorating with terrifying speed. A catastrophic dual-engine failure over the mid-Atlantic. The heavy airliner, once a symbol of human ingenuity, was now a multi-ton glider, descending through the cold, thin air. The cabin lights flickered and died, replaced by the stark, sterile glow of the emergency strips along the floor. A low hum was the only sound, the sound of wind screaming past a fuselage that was no longer being pushed forward, but was simply falling with style. The flight attendant, Julian, had based his entire assessment on a glance. He saw a young woman, out of uniform, with a quiet demeanor, and his mind, clouded by stress and ingrained prejudice, filled in the rest, hobbyist, dreamer, liability. He had loudly demanded to know if there was a real pilot on board, a captain, someone with silver hair and a commanding presence. He had envisioned a man, a veteran, someone whose very appearance would restore order. The woman in row 12 did not fit his script. Her silence was a refutation of his authority, an act of defiance he couldn't comprehend. So he dismissed her, turning his back to continue his increasingly frantic search for a savior who looked the part, never realizing the very person he was searching for was sitting right behind him, her eyes closed again, not in sleep, but in calculation, already running checklists in her head, feeling the aircraft's gentle yaw, and listening. Listening to the silence. A crackle over the intercom cut through the cabin's fearful murmur. It was the captain's voice, strained but resolute. "The woman in 12A. Please come to the cockpit." Now, there was no request in his tone, only command. Julian froze, his face a mask of confusion and indignation, but he stepped aside as she moved past him. Her movements were fluid, economical. No wasted motion, no sign of haste. She walked not like a passenger, but like someone who knew every rivet and spar of the machine she was in, someone who understood its language of stress and strain. When she entered the cockpit, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Alarms blared, red and amber lights flashing across the faces of the two men at the controls. The co-pilot was fighting the yoke, his knuckles white. The captain, pale and sweating, looked at her. He didn't have time for a resume. He had time for one question, a query that would be indecipherable to a layman but was a surgeon's scalpel to an aviator. Can you manage the energy state for a dead stick landing with a negative glide ratio? Her reply was not a boast, nor a promise. It was a simple, two-word statement of fact, delivered with the same unnerving calm she had shown in the aisle. Yes, Captain, and in that moment, the entire emotional gravity of the cockpit shifted from the two panicked men towards the quiet, steady woman who now occupied the jump seat. She slipped into the co-pilot's seat as he yielded it, her hands hovering over the controls for a moment, not touching, but sensing. It was a gesture of respect, for the machine and for the men who had fought to keep it airborne. Then her fingers moved, a blur of practiced precision. She didn't slam buttons or wrestle the yoke. Her touch was delicate, coaxing, her inputs measured in millimeters. She silenced the non-critical alarms with a flick of a switch, decluttering the sensory environment, imposing order on the chaos. The co-pilot watched, mesmerized. She was not just flying the plane, she was communing with it. Her eyes scanned the instruments, but her focus was elsewhere, on the feel of the air over the control surfaces, the subtle vibrations of the airframe. She was performing a complex, high-stakes ballet of physics and intuition, conserving every ounce of potential energy, trading altitude for airspeed with the practiced skill of a master. The terrifying descent stabilized into a controlled, impossibly shallow glide. The violent shaking ceased. The screaming alarms were replaced by a profound, deafening silence. The aircraft was stable. For the first time in 10 minutes, it was no longer falling. It was flying. Julian, standing at the threshold of the cockpit, his face pale, could only whisper the two words that echoed the thoughts of everyone who witnessed it. "That's impossible." The captain, Marcus Thorne, a man with 30 years and 20,000 hours in his logbook, stared at the woman beside him. He wasn't just relieved, he was mystified. He had seen emergency landings, simulations, and real-world disasters. He had never seen anything like this. It wasn't just the technical skill, which was flawless. It was the style, the methodology. The subtle ways she used asymmetric rudder to compensate for the drag of the dead engines, the precise angle of attack she maintained, it wasn't in any commercial airline manual. It was aggressive, refined, a technique honed not in the gentle skies of passenger travel, but in the violent, unforgiving crucible of high-performance military aviation. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice now filled with a dawning reverence. "Rostova," she replied, her eyes still locked on the horizon. The captain keyed his mic to the ground control channel, his voice now firm and clear. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Transatlantic 771. We have a passenger in the cockpit. Last name Rostova, Rostova. I need you to run that name through the Department of Defense registry." Priority Alpha, the air traffic controller, sensing the gravity in the captain's tone, responded instantly. The reply, when it came back a few seconds later, was laced with awe. The information came through the captain's headset in a staccato burst of acronyms and classifications, a secret history spoken into the sterile confines of the cockpit. The voice from the ground control tower was suddenly deferential, almost reverent. "Sir, we have a match. Major Eva Rostova. Call sign, Ghost. Currently attached to the 7th Special Projects Wing. Flight hours, 4,200. Primary aircraft, F-22 Raptor, F-35 Lightning, and multiple experimental airframes designated only by code. She holds the standing altitude record in a hypersonic reconnaissance vehicle. Noteworthy commendations include the Distinguished Flying Cross for recovering a prototype aircraft during a complete hydraulic and electrical failure over the Arctic Circle." There was a pause, then the controller added, his voice hushed, "Sir, her entire file is classified above top secret. We're not supposed to be able to even see this." Captain Thorne closed his eyes. The quiet woman in the gray hoodie. The silent professional. He finally understood. He unbuckled his harness, the click echoing in the silent cockpit. He stood, steadying himself on the bulkhead, and turned to her. In the ultimate gesture of trust and respect one pilot can give another, he gave her a slow, formal military salute. "Major Rostova," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The aircraft is yours." He then keyed the cabin intercom, his voice now a bedrock of authority and calm that washed over the terrified passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have experienced a significant technical malfunction. However, we are now in the safest and most capable hands I have had the privilege to witness in my entire career. Major Eva Rostova of the United States Air Force has control of this aircraft. She is, without exaggeration, one of the finest aviators this nation has ever produced. I ask that you remain calm and follow the instructions of the cabin crew. We are going to land this plane safely. He let that sink in before adding a final, pointed remark, aimed directly at the flight attendant still frozen at the cockpit door. It appears our assumptions about who can and cannot be a hero are a luxury we cannot afford at 30,000 feet. The rebuke was clear, a public correction of a private prejudice. Julian visibly flinched, the color draining from his face. The passengers, who had witnessed his earlier condescension, understood. A ripple of shame, followed by a tidal wave of relief, swept through the cabin. The legend of the Angel of Row 12 was born in that moment, not of action, but of validation. The story of the dead stick landing of Flight 771 spread like wildfire, first through the hushed channels of military aviation forums, then breaking into the mainstream. The leaked cockpit audio became an instant classic, a masterclass in what the military called grace under pressure. Her calm, technical, and clipped instructions, co-pilot, verify glide path angle, captain, prepare for manual gear deployment on my mark, were dissected and analyzed at flight academies around the world. She became a phantom, a myth. Major Ghost Rostova. She gave no interviews. She posed for no cameras. When the airline offered her free flights for life, she politely declined. Her only public statement was a dry, technical report to the NTSB, a document so devoid of emotion or self-aggrandizement it only deepened her legend. The focus was always on the aircraft, the procedure, the facts. Never on herself. Meanwhile, Julian, the flight attendant, faced a formal review. But his real punishment was the weight of his own misjudgment. Months later, he was seen on a flight from Dallas to Chicago, personally greeting a young, female first officer at the gate, offering to carry her flight bag onto the plane with a quiet, "Welcome aboard, ma'am." It was a small act, but it was a testament to a profound lesson learned. He never again judged a professional by their appearance. Years passed. The Rostova glide, as the maneuver she improvised came to be known, was now a standard part of emergency simulator training for commercial pilots. It was a brutal, unforgiving scenario, and most failed it on their first dozen attempts. It served as a constant reminder of the impossible standard she had set. At the Air Force Academy, a new generation of cadets listened to the declassified audio of Flight 771. Her voice, a calm island in a sea of alarms, became the voice of the quiet professional they all aspired to be. Her story wasn't just about saving a plane, it was about a philosophy. It taught them that confidence is quiet, and arrogance is loud. It taught them that respect is not a right of rank or appearance, but something earned in the silent, unforgiving arena of action. Her legacy was not in the headlines she avoided, but in the standards she raised. A framed photograph eventually found its way onto the wall of the airline's primary operations center. It wasn't of her face. It was an anonymous satellite image of the massive airliner, sitting perfectly intact on a remote runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles, a silent testament to the competence of the woman who refused to let it fall from the sky. The true measure of a legacy isn't what you accomplish in a single moment of crisis, but what that moment inspires in others for years to come. Major Rostova's triumph was not just over a mechanical failure, it was a triumph over the easy, lazy prejudice that judges a book by its cover. She proved, in the deafening silence of a failing aircraft, that the content of one's character and the depth of one's competence are invisible to the cynical eye. They are revealed not through words, but through deeds. Her silence was not an absence of speech, it was the presence of focus. Her calm was not an absence of fear, it was the presence of discipline. Her story became a parable, a teaching tool for a new generation of leaders, pilots, and professionals in every field. It reminded them that the most capable person in the room is often the one who feels no need to announce it. They are the ones who prepare in silence, who perform under pressure, and who let their results speak for them. They are the quiet professionals, the bedrock upon which excellence is built. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.